Hello again, Michael Ware with IFC's Warrior Wednesday. We have with us Ross Hick here today. I'm going to jump right into this. First, I want everybody, as always, go to iowafc.org. That's our site, iowafc.org. Become a member. We need your membership. This doesn't work without your engagement. I know you know that. So help us help you. Also, check out our Trusted Partners page. We've got a list of people that invest in us and invest in you. So they're offering tangible goods, discounts on services, you name it, to IFC members. It'll more than pay for your membership if you look down through what you can get and what you can do. Also, new, not for just a few weeks now, is IFC Store. We are collaborating with Nine Line Apparel to make great shirts that are IFC marked, and they'll take you straight to Brownells so that you can buy them right there. So they know how to source, they know how to ship, they know how to get everything done, tracking, all that kind of stuff. So we work with somebody that can do it better than we can in order to help you. So go do those things. Check it out, iowafc.org. Now, in case any of you don't know who Ross Hick is, and I'm going to turn this over to him so that he can tell you who he is. A quick Google search. So bear with me for just a quick Google search. Ross Hick, the psychology of critical incidents, inside the mind of a predator, the worst part of the homicide process, understanding bad guys. You know, these are some of the things that Ross has visited other people about, which is one of the primary reasons I wanted to bring him on. So no further ado, Ross Hick, please let us know who you are and let's delve right in.
Perfect. Nice to meet you. I currently work for an agency. A court system in the Southwest U.S. is about as specific as I'll get, because I do still have to get to retirement in about 4 years. So I have to be careful what I say there. But obviously the disclaimer right up front, I'm not speaking for them or anyone official, and I won't even tell you who they are, even if you figure it out. But this is all just my personal stuff. But that's kind of where a lot of this comes from. So I've worked for them since 2008, and I did some stuff before that as well. But since 2008, I've worked with so out in the community, supervised release stuff, people on pretrial or coming out of prison, on some pretty heinous stuff. So all of my cases were high risk level violent offenders. So ag assault with a deadly weapon, manslaughter, homicide, stuff like that. Some cartel dudes mixed in there who got caught with quantity coming over the border. And then somewhere along the way, about 6-7 years ago, I ended up in sex offenders, and don't ask me how. It wasn't my intention. It was one of those, like, no one wants to do it. So there was an empty spot. I got shoved there, and it's been a really interesting trip. I'd probably do it again, but if you told me that, 6-7 years ago, I wouldn't have believed you. So it's kind of an interesting job. And so what I primarily do now, so a lot of field stuff, a lot of arrests, search and seizure, all that stuff. Spent a lot of time with criminals, like in their homes, meeting their mom and dad, straight out of prison or right after sentencing, and for years. So unlike a lot of law enforcement who generally don't get a lot of contact outside of an investigative or arrest, or sometimes a little bit of the court, most of my cases, as high level as they were, it's talking to these guys for and dealing with them for decades, sometimes life, some of them, especially the sex offenses. So it's a level of exposure that not a lot of people get. And I joke in a lot of the classes I teach that it's mostly me trying to turn vicarious trauma into something useful for other people. And that's honestly what it is. It's me trying to say, wow, I have all of this experience. What do I do with it? And the primary thing that I've come up with is, boy, I wish we could help mitigate some of this, or just get better information out there than what's out there. And as we'll get into, I'm sure it's a tough nut to crack. There are no silver bullets. There's nothing magical that I can give you in 5 minutes that's going to protect you like a force field. It's kind of like everything else. You have to read good stuff, listen to good advice, keep your eyes open, and then it takes a little bit of luck and time and experience. And And that's kind of what I'm trying to do, is just give people a little bit more ammunition in that fight. So that's kind of who I am. Oh, and I teach firearms and all sorts of other stuff outside of here, Taser, all sorts of safety, search and seizure, things like that. So that might get peppered in there, but that's who I am.
Are you married, man?
I am engaged currently, so I am not married just yet, but I am engaged with a and I have a 9-year-old daughter, Eiley. So, yep.
All right. Well, I asked because when you began into that, I thought to myself, and I'm not sure why, but I thought to myself for a minute, I'm like, man, whether this guy's at a church social or the bar, what kind of pickup line is he going to use that's going to mitigate when he gets asked, what do you do? Well, actually, I talk with violent offenders and sex offenders for hours on end. I don't know. So I'm assuming your fiance is a strong woman. Fantastic.
Very. And believe it or not, she knew what I did when she, when we got involved. And it's funny you should mention that, because on occasion people do ask, right? So people love asking, what do you do? And I have one of two responses, which is, if I don't want to have a conversation with them, I just tell them, oh, I work for the court or something, and they go, oh, are you a stenographer? And I'm like, sure. Something like that.
I know. I've got friends and acquaintances that are very far to the other end of the political spectrum that I find myself, and most of them will let you know with body language and what they're saying pretty quick, just how tolerant they actually are, right? And then they'll ask me, well, Michael, what is it that you do? And I won't tell them that I'm a gunsmith and I build custom weapons. I won't say that. I'll be like, well, I get paid to play with big Legos. And most of the time they'll be like, oh, interesting. And because they don't want to know or they don't care, they move on pretty quick. So it's okay. I understand what you're saying.
Yep.
But anyway, I wanted to ask about that real quick, just to establish a bit of a rapport. We don't know one another. And interestingly, I suppose it's okay to chase a rabbit with you. I noticed when I was looking on the Citizens Defense Research, because I was checking out your name and where it fell. You used to train with Lima Tunes. You used to train with Melody Lauer.
Oh yeah, I guess I should have realized that. So she's in Iowa, huh? So Melody Lauer, she just moved out of Citizens Defense Research. Yeah, she picked me up as a kind of adjunct instructor. What was it, 3 years ago, something like that. And so I suddenly found myself in a cadre with the likes of Chris Seipert and Melody, and I was like, as anyone would be suddenly in that company, I'm like, what am I doing here? What am I going to do? But fascinating to work for them. And I kind of am freelance now. So I am still with Citizens Defense Research. I'm still on their website. I still do stuff with them, but I also do a lot of stuff with active self-protection, specifically the conference every year. So Active Self-Protection Conference, I'm actually wearing their shirt. So I'll plug them, because it goes for a good cause. It's for charity. All the proceeds go to help foster teen camp in the Flint Hills of Kansas. And so that's a fantastic thing to go. So if you want to see me teach, that's probably the easiest place to find me every year.
Okay. All right. Well, I know John and Melody for a lot of years, and like I was sorry that they left the neighborhood, but there was the opportunity for them was down south. So by all means, fantastic. But anyway, I can't get too far sideways. I'd like to hear you visit and you tell us about some things. So it's time for me to shut my yap. Why don't you walk us through what some of these things may look like? So we'll just start. Go ahead.
Sure. So what everybody wants to know, and I teach. So one of the classes I teach is a criminal psychology class. And it's 2 parts basically. And the first part's what everybody wants to know, right? Which is strangers, parking lots, alleyways, some dude mugs you. And that's kind of where a lot of people's headspace is, especially when they first get into self-defense. And I don't want to downplay that. That's obviously something we need to be prepared for and train for. However, obviously what I do in the day job, and I've supervised a lot of those guys, right? And I guess what I should say before I delve into the rest of it is, there are misconceptions there too, right? So it's a lot of times the comfortable, how do I say this? You've seen it on a commercial, right? You've seen it on a commercial for a product where it's a person in a parking lot, and the bad guy is a balaclava wearing, machete wielding, maniac.
Yeah.
And I gotta say, if that's your violent encounter, you won the lottery, because like it's a pretty easy problem, right? I mean, it's not an easy problem, but it's a very clear problem, right? I don't think anyone would have to think very long about what they were going to do in that situation, and hopefully they would have the tools and training to do it. However, the violent criminals I worked with, a lot of them were, these are not your average criminals. These are not your people. Some of them were, some of them were meth addicts just breaking in to steal something and fence it. But mostly my guys were career criminals who did pretty heinous stuff, gang members, lots of gang members. And the reason I mention that is because their mindset is very different. If anyone's familiar with the late, great William April, Dr. William April talked about this from a standpoint of he had kind of casual criminals, and then he had violent criminal actors. And that's kind of what I've seen in the field is the more committed guys out there, and they are usually men, they're not going to be dissuaded by brandishing a firearm necessarily, right? They've had guns pointed at them their entire lives. They've been shot. Most of my guys, my average person was in his 20s, because they don't usually live past their 30s. Or they go to prison for the rest of their life by then. So they're not usually out on the street past that. My average, male, I already said that. My average guy had been shot. So vast majority of them have been shot, either in a drug deal that went bad or by law enforcement or something. So they don't want to get shot. It hurts. They don't want to die, but they're not afraid of it like you would think. And so I throw that out there as a warning to people who, if you have a very casual criminal who's just trying to get a quick buck, and you flash a gun at them, they're probably going to run away, and great, problem solved, without any violence. However, if you think that's going to work against the guys that I've worked with, they've already planned for that. They have a plan for that. And if you give them the chance to do that, it's going to go very badly. And so I'm not advocating for anything in particular beyond just caution about the psychology. And one aspect that I've gotten into quite a few arguments with people about is open carry. And I want to say, I advocate for open carry. You should be able to do it. Staunch supporter. However, if you think the sight of a gun in a holster on your hip scares my guys, they fight cops. So if that worked, that wouldn't happen, right? And so I throw that out there as they're rare, much more rarer than your average casual criminal that you're going to run into who's just trying to get a quick buck. And so hopefully statistically you don't run into them too often, but they are out there. And the same tactics will not work necessarily on the two groups. So what does work? And I'll just give you a quick plug there, which is, detection, avoidance, deterrence. Once you're in it, you're probably just going to have to use a tool or training to get out of it. You're going to have to do something to them to get out of it. And the ways to keep yourself out of it are to spot it coming as far off as possible. And I have kind of a quick module on that I teach, but it's basically just recognizing pre-assault indicators, stuff like that. Getting out early and often in avoidance is probably your best bet with most of them. And that's kind of where I start. And, people like that, right? But that's not the scariest thing I deal with. The scariest thing I deal with is the known assailant, right? The known predator. And so sexual assault is kind of, you know, like I said, what I've done for the last 8 years or so, 7 years and some change. And it's, you know, you'll hear these statistics, like, oh, you're more likely to be assaulted by somebody you know than a stranger, and you're more likely to be sexually assaulted by someone you know than a stranger. And then everybody's left wondering what that means. So does that mean my best friend is going to assault me? Does that mean, what does that mean? And I'll just put it into some perspective here. So I have some stats that I throw up in my class. But here are, and these are from about 3 years of cases when I pulled these stats. And that accounted for about, so I only work with a limited subset of people who are high level offenders. So they keep the caseloads pretty small. So across 3 years, about 48 people. So pretty small sample size. That said, when you compare these to larger sample sizes, it's exactly the same. So I will stand by these, but these are my cases. So I can get a lot of detail. So we'll start with victims. Of my 48 cases that I pulled stats from, 5 had no direct victim, which means they were usually distributing child porn, and they weren't creating it. So there's no direct victim in their cases. 23, the victim was younger than 13. So it's about half. 22 were between 13 and 17. So nearly the other half. And then a tiny amount were over 18, 3. And I did do adult cases as well. These weren't all just child predators, so rapists, people like that. But generally speaking, the more heinous stuff tends to be, unfortunately, younger kids. And so that's the cases that I usually ended up with. My average victim age was 9 years old, just to give you an idea. And my average offender age was 28, to give you an idea of what we're looking for here. And I should mention that, you know, adult cases do happen, obviously, in the United States quite a bit. However, for every adult case, there's two child cases, 2 under 18. So it's a big problem. And they're usually less capable of doing something about it, right?
Yeah, a 28-year-old man versus a 9-year-old girl. I mean, I don't know how I don't know how you overcome that.
You don't. And that's kind of the scary part about what I get into here is I'm going to paint kind of a bleak but honest view of this. And then we can talk about solutions. But like I alluded to at the beginning, there's no silver bullet. If there were, we would have solved this by now.
Yeah.
There's no quick fix. And cut me off here. I'm going to go for a couple minutes, but I didn't want to.
No. You need to be able to do that. I was thinking to myself though when you were saying that, and I feel kind of silly. It hasn't occurred to me before quite like this, but when you deal with this kind of mind and this kind of actor, so to speak, it's reasonable, I think, to assume they're more practiced and better at doing what they're doing to you and others than you are defending yourself against it. So in apparently most all cases. So if you think about it like that, they almost always have the advantage because they're practiced and they know. Like you said, if you think waving a gun around is going to slow these guys down, it's unlikely because they've seen that before. This isn't some cat burglar that's down on his luck and is trying to make a few bucks. I mean, these people are going to achieve a goal. And maybe I don't know if it's wrong. You'll have to tell me, Ross. But if they appear to be goal oriented, it's hard to knock somebody off of a goal once they're fixate on it. It's like I'm sitting there. I remember as a kid when I watched Silence of the Lambs and the Jodie Foster character. I can't remember Clarice. You know, she's interviewing Hannibal Lecter, right? And he's like, no. He covets. He wants what he sees every day, and I'm thinking, ugh. And then it put me way out of my comfort zone, Ross. And then I thought later, I'm like, golly, I wonder if that might be right. People see these things all the time, and they get fixated on something, and now they've got to go have it. I'm like, man alive, that means by virtue of that, A predator could be just about anybody around me at any given moment, and I might be oblivious to that. And so, of course, that's pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I tripped, fell down, got dirt all over me, jumped up, dusted it off like nothing ever happened, and went about the rest of my life for a while, So I was part of the problem because I wasn't thinking through what I had ought to, but I admit I did give that some thought.
Yeah, and you bring up a bunch of good points. So, to the point that they're better than us, right? It's an interesting thing. So they're very narrowly focused. So the dudes that I deal with tend to be good is an interesting word. They're just very experienced, and once they find something that works, they do it again and again and again and again. And they get very, very practiced at it, to the point where, yeah, if you happen to fall into that tiny, narrow focused trap, yep, they probably have a plan, and they probably are very good at executing it. And you don't want to underestimate it. That said, they're not Jason Bourne. They're not out there. They do practice violence in prison, and they do get good at it. But that said, they're not superheroes. They're not. You can't. There we go. We're back. Sorry about that.
Yeah, go ahead.
So most of my guys are, they go to prison, right? A lot of them for quite a bit of time, and they get good at violence. That's what keeps you alive in prison. They get good at fighting. And so, yeah, they come out even better. That said, most of them aren't particularly talented shooters. Most of them are not particularly accurate. Depending on what they're doing, they can be surprisingly well armed and well equipped. But that said, not ninja warriors. Most of my guys don't go do a lot of grappling. They don't do a lot of hand-to-hand fighting outside of a prison setting, right? So they can fight probably better than your average person on the street, but they're not an MMA. They're not an MMA fighter. They're not a jiu-jitsu black belt, something like that. Usually, most of my guys. Mm-hmm. So that said, I don't want to paint an impossible picture here where there's just no hope. It's just, hey, be cautious that if you do happen to find yourself on the receiving end of this, don't underestimate them, right, in that particular focus, and try to stay out of their trap. Because like I said, once they find something that works, they tend to do it again and again. And a lot of my guys, without particularly talking to each other, ended up doing the same stuff, very similar, because, hey, there's a limited subset of stuff that works really well, and people tend to find it, especially when survival's on the line. So as far as that goes, just like I say, avoidance is your biggest thing, and staying out of it and recognizing it. To that point, though, like you said, it can be very hard to recognize, especially sexual predators. To be honest, yeah, they are very good at hiding. And that's kind of what keeps them off the radar until, unfortunately, when they are caught, there are usually dozens of victims across decades sometimes. And this happens even in our industry. Even in our industry, you will hear people suddenly come out with information that, stuff has been happening for a while. And that's unfortunately a really common thing in my field. If you read, police reports and what happened in the incident, usually someone knew at some point. Tragically, the most common reaction to finding out about an assault within the family was for a mom, dad, family member to do nothing. And that really rubs people the wrong way. A lot of times I have kind of a visceral reaction, and people say, well, how could they do nothing? And I tell them, well, so because your mindset is thinking about a stranger or a neighbor or someone that you don't particularly care that closely about, you're wondering, why wouldn't you just call 911 on a person? I want you to imagine someone in your life, in your family, very close to you, who you love and trust implicitly and have your entire life. Grandpa, father, brother, someone like that. And I want you to now imagine that your kid, your 9-year-old, 8-year-old, comes to you and says, this person sexually assaulted me. What would your first reaction be? Most people, if they're being honest, right, would not immediately pick up the phone and call 911. Their first thought would be, I hope it's not true. Maybe there was a mistake. Maybe there was some confusion. Let's talk about this. Well, unfortunately, we have special interviewers to work with children, because children are extremely easy to lead down a path, even subconsciously when you're interviewing them. So you as a parent, I guarantee, are not equipped and do not have a relationship where you are ever going to get the full truth out of that kid, even if you try. Because what's going to happen is that kid's going to tell you what they think you want, and they're going to pick up on your discomfort real fast, and they're going to start pulling their punches, or all sorts of things can happen. And then as a parent, now it's a feedback loop. So now you're going, oh, well, it wasn't that bad. Okay, maybe it was a mistake. Maybe I need to go talk to the person, So you go talk to them, and what's their story? Of course, their story is, oh, it was a big misunderstanding. Well, now we sweep this under the rug and we say, well, this would blow a whole family if I call 911. This would be a disaster. What are the neighbors going to think? What is everyone going to? So, let's just call this good. We'll keep the kid away from so-and-so. And I've had those cases. Literally, they said, the parent decided, okay, so we're just not going to let them babysit or be around the kid alone anymore. Well, okay, you've solved it. Even if you can do that, and I can tell you it usually doesn't work out, you've solved that one victim. And I told you they have dozens, usually by the time they got caught. So they're just going to move on to other people, and you're not going to solve the problem. So the harsh answer there is, yeah, you're probably not equipped to deal with it once you start to find this out. And unfortunately, yeah, the answer is you have to get professionals involved for a reason. You're not going to be able to solve this yourself, and it's going to go badly. So to your points, it's a very hard nut to crack. And I would just encourage people that if they ever have a kid come to them and start telling them stuff, they listen as quietly as they can, without interjecting too much, and then they think real hard about it and what they're going to do. And I would suggest getting, as much as it's going to hurt, getting professionals involved to investigate it thoroughly as quickly as you can.
Is this a situation where an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure? I mean, is that too simplistic to say?
What do you mean by prevention? Because that's creating a lot of.
Okay. Forget the prevention. Maybe prevention in terms of preparedness, situational awareness, avoiding being in these situations to begin with, if possible. And the reason I say that is, I try and make this quick and dirty analogy for people when we're visiting about these things, because I've been in these downtown areas and some of these places before. Some of them have fun restaurants and places to grab a soda, whatever it may be. And it isn't uncommon for people like me to park over there or whatever, and maybe go out the back door of one of these places and down the alley. And then, you change, you see a few things. Now you have a wife and kids, and maybe one of them's a daughter, and you're like, golly, my world looks different now. So will I take the shortcut through the dark alley, or I walk 3 blocks around on the lit street to get to my car? Well, it's a no-brainer at this point. But before, I was like, the alley's quicker, and that's what you do. So you change, or you can change to where you put yourself away from risk if possible. And then, I hope that there are markers or something that you might be able to pick up on if you're situationally aware, in order to avoid becoming a victim. And I've mentioned this on the Warrior Wednesday show on the podcast before, but it hasn't been very long ago. My daughter went to, she's 16. She was driving one of our cars, and she went to get fuel on her way to a job, right? And it was in the evening. It was after dark. And it's kind of a gas station known for not being that great. It's not a high crime neighborhood, but it's not necessarily low crime either. So long story made short, she gets clocked by a guy who's much older than her. I'm assuming at least 40 something. Very, very tall, very, very big guy. And she knows it. And she knows that something's wrong. He's staring at her. He's fixated on her. He leaves the gas station, walks out, and she can see him through the glass windows. And he does this thing. He's way over at the edge of the glass, peering through it with one eye type of thing. And she pays attention to where he goes and what he does. She has her hand on her pepper spray, whatever else. I don't know. This is all after the fact, but I'm not sure if she should have ever left the building. But she did walk out the door and then run immediately to her car, get in and lock the door. And then she went to pull away. The guy got in front of her. Stop, 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 stop. And she's like, nope. So she drove off, and because she didn't actually work that far from there, she was concerned he would watch her drive to her workplace. So she drove the opposite direction, drove clear out of town and all the way around and came back, which I thought was smart. Now, there was never a call to the police. There was never a capturing this person's likelihood on a phone or anything like that. So I do admittedly have some critiques, but for years, from my son is now growing up a little bit too. We go through these things like, hey, be situationally aware when we go in this store and we come back out here. Here's our rally point. Oh, by the way, if you have to exit the building through other means, what direction you're going to go to get back to the car. When you come out, we meet back here, then, oh, by the way, tell me about 3 people that were in there. Describe what they were wearing. If they've got a name tag, I want to know it. See if you can tell me what you would describe this person as, 30, 40, 50, how high, weight, whatever else. And so we kind of go through that stuff to get them in tune with keeping their head on a swivel and knowing a few things, okay? I don't believe that it's adequate enough. I know that, but it's a start. And so after all this incident had taken place, and she came home and told my wife, I was still out here in the shop working, and she was in bed before I came in, and Jenny told me, and I said, ugh. I said, do you want me to go down and wake her up and talk to her? She's like, no, I don't think so. I said, why don't you let it ride? I'll talk later. We did. And so I said, baby, do you understand why I've been that parent, that guy for so long that wants you to know your exits, know how you can get out, that we're paying attention to Colonel Cooper's code of awareness, and we're clocking people, whether they're white or yellow and all these other things. We've been doing this for years, and it's for good reason. I hope that you understand why it's important now. And of course she did, and whatever else. But I guess I went too far down that road. I apologize. But what I was asking about an ounce of prevention being maybe manifesting itself in a pound of cure. Are there things, Ross Hick, that we can do to get ahead of this? And if so, what are they, and how do we do them?
Sure. And to your point, yeah, I'm big on offering solutions and not just painting a bleak, picture. So I'll split this into 2 parts. I'll split it into the unknown assailant versus the known assailant / sexual assault, and they are a little bit different.
Okay, hold on. Before you do this,
okay.
Have I jumped ahead too far? Were there other things that you wanted to cover first?
No, not at all. We're bouncing around a little bit, but it all falls under the purview of criminal psychology. And the reason I make that distinction is because the solutions are a little different and they manifest a little differently. So bumping it. So to the example you just gave, right? Could that have ended in a sexual assault? Absolutely. But that started as a person that she didn't know. And we're trying to figure out what that person's intentions are and what they're doing, right? And so to that end, you're never going to know 100%, right? But some of the stuff I teach in my class is proximity based. So let's talk about human psychology and talking to people, right? So in the United States, we tend, and this is, you can look these numbers up. I have citations and whatnot, but I won't bore you with those at the moment. Edward T. Hall is some of this stuff with proxemics all the way back to the 60s and things. But long story short, we tend to not acknowledge people at distance, right? Past about 25 feet, we don't tend to look people in the eye and acknowledge them other than very briefly. And you've experienced this. Have you ever walked towards someone that you knew down a hallway and your eyes meet uncomfortably far away where you can't talk yet? And then you walk down the hallway thinking, well, what do I do? Do I just keep staring at them? Do I pretend to look at my watch? Do I do something else? That discomfort, and it's the same discomfort that you feel when you get into an elevator in proximity with people that you haven't invited there, because that's about as close as we generally get with strangers or lines, right? Without inviting people into our personal space. Your brain tries to dehumanize people, right? Your brain goes, well, this is uncomfortable. I don't like being here. I can't do anything about it. So let's pretend they're not a person. Let's distract you. Let's look at your watch. Let's look at your phone. And this isn't a new thing, right? It's gotten worse since we have more things to distract ourselves with. But that psychology is ancient. And so I throw that out there because what are you going to want to do if you look up and you see someone locking eyes with you across a parking lot? Well, I would hope you'd note it, because that's weird for them to be doing that, especially if it lasts longer than a second. But the other thing is that your brain is going to immediately want an out. It's going to go, okay, look at your phone. Pretend that, look down. Pretend that guy didn't see you. Pretend you didn't see him. Pretend you were just glancing. And we do this all the time in restaurants, things like that. And we have these weird moments where we're like, how long do I look at that guy before looking away? That's not weird. What do I do? Well, criminals know this. And so they're very, very good at their very narrow subset. So if you're a person that goes and mugs people in parking lots, you get pretty good at this, right? And what I would say is you're going to try to start if you're the bad guy, you're going to start as far away as you can, because people don't tend to look at you. And if they do, it's only very briefly. You're going to have a task, something that makes you not stand out that you can go back to. Because if you're just standing in the middle of the parking lot, staring at every single person that comes out of a car, yeah, that's kind of weird, right? So some people it's, hey, can I borrow $1? Some people it's a cigarette. Some people, do you know what time it is? Little questions like that give you a reason and a task, like I said. So a phone in your hand or something, right? So you can do that. And then once you've selected someone, right? So you've seen your potential victim that looks like they're distracted. They're not paying attention. They look weak. They look, preoccupied. Well, now I got to get close to them, right? I can't mug them from 100 yards away, although that would be really great, right? Just set up with a rifle 100 yards away and, hey, put the wallet on the ground. No. So now I got to get to them. So how do I do that without them seeing me? Well, if they're oblivious, it's real easy, right? But if not, the easiest way is to put something physical between me and them. And I've had this happen at as well, where people have tried to approach me, to ask for money or whatever. And they will, I'll see them, they'll see me across a parking lot, and then they'll disappear behind a pillar or something and then try to pop out as close as they possibly can. Because otherwise you see them coming, you can just get back in your car and leave. And then once they get close to you, right, where do we talk to people, right? We usually talk to people somewhere in the 15 to 7 foot range, generally speaking. That's about where we're comfortable with. And think about it. Where are you comfortable talking to people, even that you know? Well, they're going to try to get into that area, and then they're going to try to talk their way through it, because really what they want to do is go hands-on with you, or get close enough to go hands-on with you, or display a gun close in. They don't want to give you space to run or escape. And so they're going to talk their way through that normal zone that we would stop and talk to people. And usually it's something stupid like, oh man, I lost my wallet and on the bus, and I just need $3 to get home because my kids are hungry. And what I tell people in the classes is that what's coming out of their mouth is inconsequential. It's a practiced story. They're not even paying attention to what they're saying 9 times out of 10, because they've repeated it 50 times in the last hour, probably. So don't pay attention to what they're saying. Just tune it out. Pay attention to their body language and what they're doing. One simple tip, and this is taught by a lot of people, but you don't have to scream, stop, back up, at the top of your lungs. That's a neat idea. That's advocated by a lot of people. But how often are you actually going to do that? Are you going to do that in the Walmart parking lot tonight when someone's acting a little weird? You could, right? But some people do. Most people aren't ever going to do that. So what I advise, instead of you can escalate to that, right? I would suggest people have a lower level, easy out. And what I mean is, the criminals are asking you an innocuous question. They're not coming up to within 7 feet of you and announcing that they're going to assault you and take your stuff. Unlike all of the commercials you've seen and all of the bad scenarios and fats and things like that. That very rarely happens. They're going to ask you a question. And the reason is they're still feeling you out. They're still selecting you as a victim. And if they suddenly get close and realize, oh, he's probably got a gun, or, oh, this person's paying attention, or, oh, this person's having this reaction, they have an out. They can just go, oh, sorry, man. I just wanted to know if you had $1 because I missed, my wallet's gone on the bus, whatever. And they can leave. And what are you going to do? Call 911 because somebody asked you for $1? Nope.
Right.
They get to go do it to 50 more people until it works, until they find the person they want. And I get the question of like, well, how do I know the difference between someone who just actually wants $1 and the person who's willing to mug me or planning on mugging me and just using it as subterfuge? You don't. So that's the problem. So wouldn't it be cool if we just told them, right? If we recognized this early enough that when they're approaching within that verbal range, right, I can deploy something like, whoa, hold up, man. Now, what would a normal person do if you said, whoa, hold up? They'd at least pause, and then they'd probably explain themselves. Oh, I'm sorry. I just needed to know if you had jumper cables. Sorry. And if you were like, nope, a normal person would go, oh, well, I'll go ask somebody else. No biggie. The person who has rehearsed this script is trying to just walk straight through that. So usually when you're doing something nice like, whoa, hold up, that person won't even hear you. And you can test this on people, right? If you have the guy that comes around at the gas station pumps person to person asking the same, you'll hear them telling the same story to the person at the pump next to you 3 times before they ever get to you. And if you're like me, you're thinking like, oh, I don't need to hear your story again, man. And then they get to you, right? And as soon as they start talking, if you're like, nope, don't have any money, man, a lot of them won't even register it. They'll just keep telling you the story, or they'll go, oh, well, and they'll take a branch off of that story because they're so used to rehearsing it. And the violent offenders do the same thing, right? They have a plan. They know where they're going with it. My point being, if you tell somebody like nicely, like, hey, whoa, hold up, and they don't stop, that's a problem.
Yeah. And
what I would suggest is you need a tool, because probably where this is going isn't good. I would at least have pepper spray. I love OC spray, right? And a lot of people kind of poo-poo it because it's just spicy hot sauce. I've used a lot of OC in my job, and the reason it's not the most effective thing in the universe, right? It might solve your problem, but don't count on it. It's an eye jab in a can, right? But what it's good for is it's a very low level of force in most states. So I can have it in my hand. And if I accidentally OC spray someone who wasn't a threat, it's not a big deal. Most police agencies are going to go, well, what was the person doing when you OC sprayed him? Oh, he's walking up on me as a single lady out in the parking lot, and I told him to stop and he didn't. And they're going to go, oh, good. Did you empty the whole can? Sweet. The funniest one I ever heard was a guy who did that, got OC sprayed, and the cops were looking for him. I'm listening to the radio, and the first cop on scene finds the guy, he can't see. So instead of wandering into traffic, he just walked over into an alleyway and just stopped, basically just holding his face for a while. And the cop found him and he keys the radio, and you can hear the guy in the background just screaming because it hurts. I've been OC sprayed a lot, but he hadn't apparently. So he's, ah! And the cop said, well, he's been rendered peaceful. And I thought, oh, that's a really good phrase. I like that. I'll steal that. So render people peaceful. Now, can you OC spray people and have no effect? Yeah. Repeated exposures reduce effects. Some people have reduced sensitivity to it. So don't expect it to just win your fight. And the worst thing you could do is OC spray somebody and then be like, I won, and then stay there. No, the OC
Right.
spray is the starter pistol for the mad dash retreat. So once you OC spray somebody, it creates a window of opportunity, just like tasers and everything else, to leave, to get the heck out of Dodge. And so it's a lot harder for someone having trouble breathing and seeing to grab you as you're running away. It's a great tool, right? Our friend the skunk helps us with that. So OC spray, you know, give them a verbal if you can of like, hey, hold up for a sec. Now, if they don't stop, you can escalate, and I'd recommend it, right? So that's the time to get loud and see what they do, right? Now, if somebody screams stop at you as loud as they can in a parking lot that you were honestly just trying to see if they had jumper cables, what are most of us going to do? Stop. Yeah, we're at least going to stop and be like, whoa, I think there was a miscommunication here. So again, if they don't stop at that point, you need to do something about it, right? You need to, your training and your force, you know, options and whatever legalities you have locally. OC spray is great in most jurisdictions, and then escalate from there, right? So that's kind of some of the brief stuff we're looking for, and there's a lot more we could talk for quite a while, but you know, you've probably heard this from other people, but other common pre-assault indicators we're looking for. I have my list up so I don't forget any. So abrupt committed movement. So you'll see this, you know, if you're just watching people ask people for money, right? You'll see them try to close the distance as quick as they can between people without giving them a chance to jump in a car and leave. So sometimes it's as obvious. I've seen a guy pulling his shirt off to go have a fight across the parking lot, marching across the parking lot. I wasn't the person he was going to go fight, but you better believe I was like, you know, I think I'll go get gas somewhere else. Get back in your car and leave. Grooming, you see a lot of that, right? Especially around the face, back and neck, things like that. You see people nervously touching their face, doing stuff like this. Addicts, you'll see them kind of rub skin and do things like that, bugs crawling, stuff like that. So watch out for that stuff. Usually you'll pick up on it pretty without trying. It's usually pretty obvious. And generally, if you think, huh, what's going on with that person? I would recommend leaving or getting enough distance to where you can observe them from afar and find out.
Yeah.
Hiding hands, right? People, you know, there's this mythology that like somehow you can divine someone's intentions from staring at their eyes. I hate to tell you, I've worked with a lot of psychopaths. No, you can't. There's nobody home. You can look, the guys you really need to be afraid of are there's nothing there. You're not going to get anything from them. So watch hands, because right, that's what kills us. Watch where those go. Staring and dehumanizing gaze, you'll see that a lot. So you know, if you're law enforcement and you're talking to somebody or not, you're talking to somebody and you ask them a pretty simple question like, oh, hey man, you know, what's your name? And they do this one to you. They're looking past you and they just kind of look off into the distance. Oh, what's my name? Yeah, my name's Ross. That is a very bad sign. Whatever they were thinking about was not what you were asking them. And yeah, you need to get out of that conversation fast or be ready for violence. Glancing at stuff. So you'll see little target glances, little micro glances at stuff they want or escape routes, witnesses, right? Somebody's talking to you and they start glancing around. That's a really bad sign, obviously. So a lot of them will kind of hide it with their story. They'll be like, oh yeah, you know, I lost my wallet on the bus over at the bus stop. And it's part of their story. But that's why I say ignore what they're saying and pay attention to what they're doing. Does it make sense in context? Blading and awkward poses, you know, in the class, we do it in person, which is when we talk to people, we tend to square off and talk. If someone's sitting, we tend to get down on their level. If we're trying to be non-intimidating, right? We'll get down with kids on their level and talk to them. But that's a terrible place to start a fight from. So pay attention. If what they're doing with their body is incongruous with what they're saying or what their intention supposedly is, that is a big, big sign. Fighting stances, hiding hands, digging for things around their waistband, blading sideways, all of this stuff is easily missed. It's easy to say. it's easily missed by people who are paying attention to the story, because that's what we do. And when we talk to people, what do we look at normally? Faces, right? Up here.
Yeah.
This ain't giving you any information, I promise. And so we got to get away from that. And this is socially accepted. So it's weird not to look at people's eyes and faces when you're talking to them for a lot of us. But check in with the face. And I would say primarily, I look everywhere else. I once had one of my guys out in the field call me on it, because I was so used to looking everywhere else for danger. I don't need to look at you to have the conversation. And he finally asked me one day, he's like, dude, how come you never look me in the eyes? You're always looking everywhere else. And I was like, oh, I noticed. I was like, yeah, because I give him some BS answer, but to be honest, the real answer was, because I'm not worried about your face. Your face isn't going to kill me. I'm worried about all the other stuff where you have guns stashed, all these other things. And then, bad guys keep weapons in waistbands almost universally. It's becoming more common, but you never used to see holsters. So usually they got to hang on to them. Usually they're shoved in pockets, waistbands, things like that. So if you see people adjusting stuff, touching, going anywhere near the waistband, that's usually a problem. And that's kind of just some of the stuff that I would be looking for in a stranger situation, walking across the parking lot with an unknown person. And we can get into known stuff. That's a little bit different when we get into family members and friends and neighbors and stuff for sexual assault. That gets a lot harder, but we can talk about that too.
Is there any in between? You said earlier it's going to hurt, and people are naturally hesitant because they may not want to trip somebody up inadvertently. Is there an in between that people can talk to if they suspicion something?
Boy, I really wish there were a good resource for that. What people tend to do is talk to another family member, right? So they will reach out to somebody, and just their parents or brothers or somebody, and ask for advice, a spouse, and be like, hey, here's what I heard. And the problem is, unless that person does this for a living, and even if they do, right? There's no mind reading going on. It's just stats. And so, I can tell you something's a risky behavior 80% of the time, but it doesn't mean it's not the 20%. And so a lot of people want the silver bullet. They want to know, Ross, what are the 5 things I can look for? And I wish it were that easy. If it were, we would have solved this by now. And so it's more a case of time. The biggest thing the biggest thing you don't have is time, right? But that is also the key to observing behavior long term and figuring out what's going on. And it takes years to catch folks when they're, especially the sexual assault side, very commonly years or decades to catch. So I wish there were a good intermediate, but that's why when you start to suspect something and you've got to the point where you're never probably going to get beyond any doubt. And a lot of people want to do that. They don't want to go to the police unless there is zero doubt. They know exactly what's going on. The intermediate step would be what it would be to not know, right? 100%. But withdraw entirely from that person, never let the kids around them again, cut them off. And you do see that. I will say, though, the worst thing you can do is what I described at the beginning that I see in so many cases, which is try to come up with excuses in your own head as to why it didn't happen or why it's not a thing, and then ignore. And I mean, there's cases tragically where kids told their parents what was happening in explicit detail, and the parents ignored it, decided not to do anything about it because they couldn't deal with the reality of it for years, until one kid's sister came to them and said the same thing happened with the same family member. It was grandpa in that case, and babysitting. And then parents finally did something. And super common. And I think one of the biggest things that I can do for folks is create a parking space in their heads where at least this exists, so that you have a slightly higher chance of seeing it and not just immediately dismissing it. To that end, I do have a couple other stats if you're interested in hearing them of what this actually looks like.
Okay.
And this is the vast majority of cases that I deal with. So we talked about the victims. Let's talk about the offenders. So same 48 cases. 25, so about half, were family or an intimate partner and direct family members. We'll talk about who in just a minute. 15 were acquaintances, so about a third, or direct family friends. 6 were met online, and that's actually increasing. So kids these days are online earlier than ever. And if they are young, if they are younger than teenagers, really, you got to monitor. I know it sucks, but you as a parent have to just be in their life enough to know there's parental controls on phones where you can see every text message, all sorts of stuff like that. And a lot of people are like, oh, that's too invasive. I hate to tell you, that's probably about the only way you're going to catch it, because the kid's not going to be equipped to, especially when they're like 8, 9, 10. If they got a phone, they are not going to understand what's happening until it's too late.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to be paying attention to what that is. And they will think they're talking to a friend, and they don't understand the concept of anyone could be on the other end of that phone number, kiddo. And the last stat I'll throw at you for offenders is only 2 were complete strangers out of my 48. And that tracks with national standards too. And this is what I try to get out there is a lot of people you'll hear it in a lot of community groups. They're worried. I had a neighbor who knew what I did, and she came to me one day and she said, Ross, I'm worried about this guy. I think he's a sex offender. And I said, oh, who can you describe him? Yeah, he drives a white truck and he drives down down our street. It's a cul-de-sac. So he drives down our street and he turns around and drives away, and he does it like twice a day, and he never stops. And I know he knows I have kids, and et cetera, et cetera. And she described this guy, and I'm thinking, okay, does he ever get out of the truck? Does he ever talk to the kids? Does he ever do anything? No. And I said, well, there's like 50 people, including lawn care people, everybody else, who turn around on our street because it's easier than doing an 87-point turn in our narrow drive just to go to the end of the street and turn around. And that's exactly what was happening. And so that, though, is, and meanwhile, I should say, this neighbor was inviting, she was single. And I saw an endless cast of people coming to her house, boyfriends, all sorts of stuff, who every alarm bell in my head was going off every time I saw what these guys were driving, what they did, how they acted, everything. I was like, and she was completely ignoring that because the guy in the truck is the problem. It's the stranger. Statistically speaking, incredibly rare. So I hate to say, and I'll point out in a minute, well, the 2 cases that I had, and this tends to track, that were people who did this in public to strangers, they tend to be crazy. They tend to be very easy to spot. They're disheveled. They're mentally ill. I had a case where a guy, went into a department store, went to the pharmacy section. I don't know why it was always the pharmacy section, but that's what he did. And he would walk up to kids alone. He'd wait until he saw a kid alone. He would walk up and say, can I tickle you? And then he would grab the kid and molest them. And this guy did this. The kid told mom told security told the cops. So now they're looking for this guy, and he came back and did it the next day in the same aisle. Now you'd think, why on earth? Because he's mentally ill. You could catch that guy, let him out of jail, and he'll do it again. And so the point is, the really obvious ones, right, that you hear about in a lot of groups where people are like, well, I saw this guy at the playground taking pictures of my kids, acting weird. So I ran up and confronted him and he ran off. That guy will be back tomorrow. That guy will be back next week. That guy will be back. They don't stop. And so I warn people that, you need to get police involved. You need to do something to figure that out. Because that person's probably so mentally ill, they're just going to keep coming back, and they're not scared. Right? They don't have the capacity for it. So, and they're not the biggest problem. They're 1%. Like I said, the biggest category was family or intimate partner. And I don't know if you want to, but I usually ask people, who do you think out of family, direct family members, who do you think my number one offender was? What the relationship was?
Grandpa, stepdad, uncle, something like that.
Stepdad. So number one was stepdad by far, by a margin of like threefold.
Yeah.
Next, and people kind of, well, now stepdads are a problem. Well, no, so think about it. If you're a sex offender, if I asked you right now to go get a picture with a stranger's, 7-year-old as a scavenger hunt, go get a selfie with a 7-year-old that, started, a 7-year-old period, go do it now. If you didn't have one, if you didn't have a 7-year-old in your house, you'd probably go find a friend or a family member that has a 7-year-old, right? You wouldn't just go snatch one off the street randomly or run up to somebody in a store or a stranger and be like, I need a picture with your kid. Well, why do we imagine that it's any different for sex offenders? So yeah, they can run to the playground and go grab a kid and run across, but then there'll be a manhunt nationwide for that person. So unless they're crazy, the ones that are, what they're going to do is go find a single mom. They're going to go find somebody and develop a relationship. And so I hate to tell you, if you're in the dating pool and you got kids, young kids, this is those people will find you on purpose. So stepfather, super common, followed, I should add, by biological father was number 2. And a lot of people don't want to think about that. Why would they do that to their own kids? You need to have a parking space for it. Super common. After that, it went down from most common to least common. So stepfather, biological father, cousin, uncle was 4th, ex-boyfriend, half-brother, biological brother, adopted brother, and grandfather was last, although that one does happen enough to be a problem, right? Of the acquaintances, the relationships went from most likely to least likely. Neighbor, followed by adult friend living with the family. That was second category. And that happens in a lot of people, especially when finances are tough, things like that. People start moving in and bringing people home with them, right? You might have your kid move back in with you and think, yeah, my kid's good. Who are they bringing home? Especially an adult kid. You may not have as much control over that as you think. Followed by babysitter. Unfortunately, that is true. Boyfriend of a family member. Friend of a sibling. And then the last category was friend of a friend at a party, basically. So acquaintance at a party. Yeah. But what do parents worry about when their kids are growing up, right? Oh, who's going to be at the party? Who's going to be there? Not nearly as likely as neighbor, adult friend you bring into the home, things like that. And that's why I bring this up, because we need to have a parking space for the actual problem that we're looking for and who we're looking at. Where it happened, 30 of these cases happened at home. So almost 2/3 happened at home, inside the home. 15 happened at a friend or family member's home. 2 happened in the offender's car, and only 1 happened in public. So again, if you are out looking for stranger danger at the park, yeah, it exists. But statistically, for every one of those, there's 99 other ones that you got to be worried about out there. And I would not focus on that. We know what to do with that, right? The person runs across the parking lot and snatches our kid at the playground. I hate to say, it's a pretty easy problem to deal with as far as identifying it and decision making. Who the victim told, 24 of them told a family member. So if you are a family member, that's usually who gets told first, because of what we said at the top, which is you don't just pick up the phone and call 911 when someone you love is supposedly being accused by this kid. You think, oh, we got to figure this out. 12 told nobody. And you think that's a quarter of them. And you think, well, how did anybody find out? Most of those cases were parents picking up a phone and seeing text messages or walking in on it. That happens with young kids. It's not unusual. So be prepared for that with a family member, right? It's a tough headspace to have, but that's what happens. 5 told friends, 4 told social workers or teachers, and only 3 told law enforcement directly. So super common that even if this doesn't affect you directly, you might be the family member who gets to find out about it and needs to think clearly and go, okay, we need to call law enforcement, or we need to call someone professional and get them involved, because at this point, I'm not going to be able to get to the bottom of this. So to wrap it all up, my most common, if I had to have an average victim, my most common case was a female victim under 18, assaulted by family or friend, stepdad, right, at home, who tells a family member, usually years later. The average was about 1.5 years from when something happened until anybody heard about it. So super common. That's the average, right? Some of those quite a bit longer. 91% of the victims that I worked with did not tell anyone immediately. And so that's why when you hear cases of someone coming out with an allegation and then all of a sudden 3 other people come out with the same allegation against that person, yeah, there are false allegations. Those do exist, especially with adults, way less so with kids. So usually if it's a kid, you need to take them at face value and do the investigation. But a lot of people dismiss that as, oh, these are just, why are all these people suddenly coming out now? Super common, because there's probably years of victims in most cases that never said a word. And then finally, when it's out, now they're not the only one. Now they're not, okay, now I can say this because I'm not going to be the only one. And so you do tend to see a pile on. And sometimes, unfortunately, there are false allegations mixed in with some of that, especially when it's celebrities. But that in itself is not unusual in these cases, to just have suddenly a bunch of people all at once. And kids, unfortunately, like I said, years until something's done about it. So that's kind of what the problem looks like. And I wish I had a better resource than just getting professionals involved, because I know a lot of people aren't going to do that, but I don't. A lot of people will try to. The other one that I will warn people against is clergy. So people will go to their religious leaders and present this for advice. And I cannot stress enough that they are not trained to interview kids. They are not trained to deal with this stuff. And this is a hyper specific problem that even your average law enforcement isn't going to necessarily wrap their heads around it. It's a dedicated team. Usually sex offender stuff is locally we call it a SORT team, right? But it's a department within the department that is very, very few people, but it's specifically for this reason, because of the training levels and experience required to do it. So the chances that you're going to go to somebody and tell them, hey, my kid accused stepdad of this, what should I do? And that they're going to have a good answer. They're going to try their best, but I can tell you from experience, that's in a lot of my cases where they went and told clergy, and the clergy said, well, let's wait and see, or, okay, let's try to keep them away, or, oh, I'll talk to so-and-so. And it didn't go well. So would recommend against that, and would just stress again, as much as it's going to hurt to rip the Band-Aid off and get professionals involved. If it's a false allegation, they are the best equipped to get to the bottom of it. If there was a mistake, they're the best equipped to get to the bottom of it. And they're not going to take something to trial that they're kind of sure, right? They're going to be dang sure. And so I say that as much as it hurts, you got to do it.
If you can't tell from where I'm at now, from how I started this conversation, I'm not saying that I'm not doing well with it, but it's very troubling for me. And I'll be very frank. I mean, the things that are going through my head are negative. I'm not happy about these things. I'm not really sure. Um, you're outlining an absolutely overwhelming, tremendous problem that I'm not sure that I can do a ton about. Or let me rephrase that. I believe, at least at this moment, with what I've got going through my mind, that I'm ill-equipped to do what I would like to in order to recognize these things and help prevent these things. And also, if something does manifest itself, in order to deal with it adequately, because the things that you have illustrated outline a little bit of my complacency, I guess. And I'm not particularly proud of that. I'm having some trouble with this. So what should I, because I could probably see myself being the guy that says, we absolutely can't go to the cops with this, because if we're wrong, we'll ruin somebody's life. I mean, I could hear myself thinking that when you said those things. And now I'm like, I'm not sure that there's any choice, because if you expect victims to be able to voice what has happened, then they've got to be believed. You've got to take them at face value, and you've got to help the people that need help.
That's where I would start, and I'm not saying it won't end up being more complicated, right? And there won't be some exaggerations or misstatements involved, but you got to start. That's the biggest thing as a parent, is starting from a place of believing your kid and then deciding what the next step is from there, and figuring it out. And yeah, I mean, to be honest, this is a tough topic because there's no silver bullet, and because it's kind of all bad news, which is why I'm looking forward to retirement and doing something very different after a while. But I get that. And one of the things I joke about, and it's not even really a joke, it's just to deal with it, is people's initial reaction, a very common reaction to hearing what I actually do, is for people to say, well, let's just shoot them all in the face. And I say, okay, I get it. You start doing that tomorrow and let me know how far you get down the list. Probably not very far. Not a drop in the bucket. I have to go to work tomorrow and try to prevent this stuff. So as much as that's a nice thought, we got to have something better. And I can tell you, when you say that, what you're thinking is, I'm shooting a stranger in the face is trying to snatch my kid at the parking lot. What you're not thinking is that it's your stepdad or your dad or your spouse or your whomever, right? Or your grandfather, because that's who it's going to be statistically. So if you're not prepared to do that, that's just a way to shut down the conversation. And I get it. It's a way to just stop talking about it. And I respect it. Usually I go, okay. But if that's all we got, and you talked about it, this is incredibly uncomfortable to talk about. And I won't get into the details of some of these cases on here, but other people have heard some anonymized details, and it's stuff that, at my job, we sit in treatment. I get to hear in excruciating detail what these people did to kids. And that's part of the job. That's like a Tuesday, man. And it changes you in a way where all I can say is, we got to start talking about this a little bit. We got to start having the uncomfortable conversations and not imagining that this is a problem that's solved at the playground by taking a picture of someone and sharing it on the social group. Good. I'm not saying don't do that to the creepy guy, but if you then pat yourself on the back and think my kids are safe, no, they are not, statistically speaking. So let's talk a little bit about some of the signs of this. And what stinks is that there's no silver bullet here. So you're going to hear a lot of stuff that you're going to immediately think, well, Ross, that could just be nothing. Yeah, that's why this is so hard to catch, and why you have to look for multiples of these over years. Whoop.
You're okay.
There we go. Sorry, hiccup. Are we back?
Yes, go ahead.
There we go. Sorry. Little hiccup there. So that's why we have to look at multiples of these across years to catch this. So let's get into a couple of these here. These will increase in severity, right? So there's sorry, we're having some internet hiccups here. So most of my guys are socially awkward, to say the least, because being a psychopath will do that. You're good at faking human behavior, but you're not very good at displaying it. Put on your human suit. So early on, you can see some awkwardness and weirdness, but then this also affects a whole lot of other people who are just awkward. So it's not necessarily a sure indicator. But if you notice awkward movie dating tropes, right? Like, someone throwing pebbles at the window at night and things like that. People don't do that. Not in reality, not anymore. So if you start seeing weird stuff like that, where you're just like, where did this person learn this? If they're really young, okay, they might just be awkward. But if they're, in their 20s, like most of my offenders were, mid to late 20s, yeah, that's weird, man. Wanting reassurance of status. So they'll check in all the time. Like, are we okay? Are we okay? Are we okay? Yeah, because they're worried about getting caught. So they want to make sure they're okay with everyone around them. Are we okay? Yeah, we're okay. Okay. Things like that. And again, some of this is these can manifest for people who aren't predators in the slightest bit. So I don't want you to take this and run out and start accusing people, but pay attention. Mm-hmm. Lack of concern about desires or needs of the partner or the people on the receiving end of their affection. So in general, they're more worried about how they come across than how the other person's actually receiving it. So don't like feedback a lot of times, right? They want you to be quiet and enjoy it. Discomfort discussing, believe it or not, discomfort discussing sex and intimacy. You'd think that, someone who is doing the things they were doing wouldn't have a problem talking about it. No, they'll blush in treatment. We'll make them describe stuff and they will blush, which is, you wouldn't think, but there you go. Moving goalposts, ignoring boundaries is a big one. So like the stranger boundary I talked about in the parking lot, we can do an emotional version of that, right? Which is predators hate boundaries. They will try to talk you out of their boundary. And so out of your boundary. So what I recommend people do is first off, you have to be a healthy enough person to know what a healthy boundary is, but then establish one in a little way and see what happens. If you tell your date or whoever, you tell someone that you're not comfortable with something, or, even someone who wants to borrow your kids for a sleepover, and you tell them, hey, I'm not cool with, them being 6 hours away. Is there something else we could do? Or I'll host the sleepover. Or, hey, how do I get my kid in the middle of the night if they call me and they need to come home? And they're not willing to accommodate that. And they try to talk you out of it by saying, oh, why are you worried? You worry too much, nothing's going to happen. Or that's a really bad sign. A healthy person, when they hear that boundary, is going to go, oh, what did I do to make you uncomfortable? Okay, let me figure that out. Let me figure out how to make you comfortable. Not let me talk you out of everything you want and force it. So teaching this to your kids is big too, right? Even at an early age, like 8, 9-year-olds, yeah, they can understand this in a limited amount, which is if somebody's talking to you and they don't listen to what you're saying and they just try to talk you out of it, bad sign. Counter accusations and gaslighting. Oh boy, if I had $1 for every time I went to a halfway house and I said, "Hey man, you missed treatment on, Wednesday. Where were you?" And they said, and I'm not making this up, "Yeah, I missed what you said 3 weeks ago that you were gonna give me a phone number for a job, and then you never did." And so and all of a sudden you're talking about that, and you're like, "Dude, what?" Like, okay, here's the phone number, and they will never forget it. 6 months from now, they'll still bring it up. They're rules lawyers. And so I don't know why, but I can tell you that the vast majority of my sex offenders are, they will sit there and argue about something you said 6 months ago. And really common that, they'll have multiple people supervising them and the stuff will change, right? So they might not have been able to do something and then they could, but then they screwed up. So we took that away. So now they can't do it again. Boy, they'll still do it. And when you ask them why, they'll say, "Well, so-and-so, when I got out of prison, 6 months ago said I could do it." And you're like, "Yeah." And then like 50 other people told you couldn't, including a judge. Did you not, after that, did you not think that was relevant? And they go, "Well, but so-and-so," and they will hang their hat on the fact that somebody said so. Now think about this from a relationship, right? If you give them permission, whether it's, "I'm okay with this particular thing," like holding hands, let's say, or kissing, and then suddenly I'm not okay with that, how do you think they're going to react to that? Same way, which is, you told me I could. Why are you so uncomfortable now? You were okay with it, and now it's your problem, right? You're the problem for changing the rules. Super common. So if you start hearing that kind of stuff, bail. And if you see this in your kids' relationships, like, this is a serious issue. Lying about trivial things. Oh man. That's almost omnipresent in these cases about stuff that doesn't even matter, because their whole life is a lie, right? Their whole life, they've gotten to this point by playing a role to everyone they know, to the point that, yeah, the lines are blurred. It's very hard for them to differentiate anymore. And there really isn't much of a reality left anymore. It's all kind of an act, to the point that they will lie about stuff that you're just scratching your easily disproven things. You'll catch them in these stupid lies and you're like, why? Like, why would you lie about that and then get caught? That personality, man, that's just what they do. And so a lot of times what I do, functionally, is it'll be the stupidest thing that catches them. It'll be some tiny little lie that you can easily disprove. And then you pull that thread and you go, "Man, why would he be lying to me about that? I'm going to look at his case a little closer. I'm going to look at what he's doing. I'll follow him around for a while," or whatever the case may be. And then it just unravels, right? You find something else out. So pull those threads. If someone says something weird, that would be the other one, is the human suit starts to slip a little bit sometimes, and they will, if you're around them enough, they will say something and just blurt something out that about how they think the world works or how people think, that is just 180 degrees off of reality. To give you an example, I had a guy who went to prison for 17 years and he was convicted. And he tried after the fact to convince everyone that he went to prison because he was drunk, had a drinking problem. And even though he didn't commit the heinous act that they accused him of 3 times with 3 different people and had proof of, he thought he should just plead to it because that way he would get sober. And I'm like, in what world do you think anyone believes that? that you would go to prison for 17 years on an offense that will brand you for the rest of your life with it, and and let's ignore all the physical evidence and everything else. What, but yep, stuck to it. Just thought that's a thing that people would do. So you should believe me. So stuff like that you're just like, what? And it'll come out every now and then. You'll catch something. But what do we do when people say weird things like that and we're friends with them? We ignore it. We tune it out, or we think, wow, that was weird. Must just be having a bad day. And you know what? Maybe. But this is the key, is write it down. Record it somewhere. Because, and it seems crazy to do that, but especially if you're seeing this again and again and again, you will not remember how often this is, or you will dismiss it and your brain will dismiss it. We are pro-social creatures who are built to dismiss minor transgressions with each other that we people we love, because otherwise we'd be at each other's throats every second of the day, right? So this is a thing that is built into us. But because of that, we ignore problems until, what does everybody say when the neighbor comes out as a serial killer or a sex offender? They go, oh, he seems so normal. But then they think back and they go, how did I miss it? There was this time 3 years ago when he said this. Yeah, because you do it to everybody in your life. You just miss 100 weird things a day that people do because they're having a bad day or something. But when you write it down and you go back and you look at, wow, this one person does this like 20 times a week and says these weird things all the time. That's the power of time, to be able to look back and go, oh, this is weird. Like something's going on. And so I caution people against jumping on the first thread. Pull the thread, but don't just, people conclude their investigations there. They see one weird text message and they go, ha ha, I got him. Or they ignore it. Somewhere in between. What I tell people to do is pull that thread, but be prepared for it to go nowhere today. Write it down. Do something about it, right? If your kid's texting with someone weird, sit down and talk to your kid about it. Why is it weird? Talk about boundaries, all this stuff. And wait, because I guarantee the one thing I've learned from working with sex offenders this long is that they will absolutely out themselves eventually. It just takes a long time and we miss it and dismiss it. So wait, and they will do something weird again, especially if they think they got away with it. They don't give up, right? They don't stop. And so it will come up again. Lastly, if you're looking at somebody's relationship from the outside, one of the worst signs is isolation. Physically and emotionally. So if you had somebody that had, your best friend in the universe and had friends with, they were friends with everybody, going out to parties, doing stuff, social butterfly. And then they started dating this guy and gradually they just did less and less and less. And this happens in adulthood. So this is somewhat normal, but now they can't even call someone without that other person present or on speaker. They can't go out. They can't control their own finances. All of this isolation is a very bad sign, and usually the sign of a pretty unhealthy relationship. And predators love to do it, right? Sexual predators love to physically isolate people and emotionally. And to that end, they will pick people who are already they pick victims that are easy victims, right? They're not going to go after people who are going to make the news if they have an alternative. So a lot of times they're going after people who already have addictions or already have secrets from their parents. Man, if I can give you one bit of advice as a parent, is do not have secrets in your family. And that doesn't mean your kid has to tell you everything that's going on in their life. But if you're the sort of person who keeps secrets from your kid about things that you're embarrassed about, and then you expect your kid to not do that in reverse once they're old enough to, that is a bad example to set.
Yeah.
And that is what predators love. They love that wedge to say, no one will love you except me. No one will understand you. And now that you've done this thing with me, no one will love you. No one will believe you. No one will care for you ever again. You're tainted. And that is their working space. And so if you can take that away as a parent and convince your children that you will always be there for them. And there's consequences. That doesn't mean that they just get away with everything, but it means you will be there to support them. And that is the best deterrent you can have.
The truth is paramount in our home. I had a dear friend of mine, a mentor many years ago, explained to me, he's like, I'm not suggesting you and your wife are liars. He said, well, what you need to do is you rear your children. Just make sure that they understand that the truth is absolutely first and foremost, that if there's a problem, fine, we'll figure it out. We'll work it out. You may have a consequence. You may not like it. But don't lie to me, because this is never going to work. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not going to withhold from you. So if you've got something that you need to share with me, or you need to ask me, then let me know. And if it makes me uncomfortable, I'll just have to say, well, that made me uncomfortable. Give me a second here so I can compose my thoughts, and we'll talk about it and whatever else. And I'm not suggesting to you, Ross, that my family has that mastered. We do not. But I think that we're a little bit ahead of the curve compared to a lot of folks, because my son, who he loves to get in trouble. He is self-reporting to some degree now. And it's also helped him ask to do the things that he ordinarily would get in some trouble for. An example would be, I don't want he's 12. He doesn't have any business being on YouTube. And he's like, because I would find him on YouTube. I would walk in and he's got the YouTube fired up to the TV because he doesn't have any devices, right? And I'm like, dude. And then I would go back through and I'd see what he'd been watching. It was Poppy Playtime and weird video games where there's some stupid stuff going on, some of it violent, just either dumb or nasty, and I'm like, I don't know why it is you want to see this. He's like, well, it just started showing up one day and then there was more of it. So anyway, I said, well, that's why I don't want you seeing this stuff. If you're going to watch YouTube, I'll watch it with you and we'll keep an eye on things. And now it's to the point, is like, well, what I really want to watch is fire alarm tests, tornado siren tests. I don't know what's these anyway. I'm sorry, I'm getting sleepy. Railroad crossings. So,
okay.
He has a hearing impediment, so it's not uncommon for him to want to see and experience loud things. Okay, that's why he's a drummer. So anyway, but now he'll be like, can I watch YouTube if I just watch these things? I'm like, well, yes, you can watch it in the front row while I'm reading, right? So that it's in proximity to me and I can watch what you watch or look up. Yeah, I think we can work that out. And so now, instead of him sneaking it, he's coming forward to say, this is what I want to watch. Can we work this out? Yeah, let's seek the truth here. And I don't know if that works for everybody, but it ought to be a good start. It ought to work because if my kids have to come to me and say, listen, this thing happened, it needs to be based on our relationship being truthful, so that it's very easy for me to believe it. And then me move past the things that are exceedingly hard so I can do what you're suggesting.
Yeah. And perfect example, right? A lot of people, to give an actual example of people are worried about, sexual slavery. They're worried about their kids getting kidnapped and whisked off to something. And those that exists, right? But not in the way that a lot of people think. They assume that there's a kidnapping or, playground snatching or snatching at the mall or something like that. Sometimes that does happen, but the vast majority, actual case, right, out of an actual case that was 3 16-year-old girls who went to the mall with each other and hung out, and this guy, older guy in his late 20s, shows up and says, hey, I won a gift card at the mall for $500 through some radio thing, and I got to spend $500 here, and I don't know what to buy. I mean, what do I need from the mall? Would you girls want to help me spend some of it? I'll give you some of it, and we can just hang out. You can spend it. Now, alarm bell number one, and this is something to tell your kids, is that adults don't need your help. So if an adult comes to you and says, I really need your ideas and your help, No, they do not. So they do, but they're 16-year-old girls, and this good dude just walked up with hundreds of dollars. So they're thinking, hey, yeah, let's do this. And we're at a public place at a mall with lots of people. It's safe, right? And so they do. They get their nails done and a bunch of other stuff. And he buys some things for himself, buys them some gifts. But the key here is they owe him now a little bit, right? Psychologically. But he doesn't spring the trap yet because he's a smart guy. And so what he does is he waits to the end of the day, plays it cool. And one of those girls has their own car. One of those girls got a ride. And the third girl didn't have a great relationship with her parents, and she had to take the bus. So he gets in his car, finds the one that's taking the bus. He watches. He drives up to the bus stop and says, hey, do you want a ride? Like, I'll give you a ride home. I don't want you to have to sit out here and ride the bus. And of course, she says yes. And again, people are thinking this is where it happens. This is where he springs the trap. No, he gives her a ride home. Doesn't do a thing except get her phone number, because now they're friends. And so then he starts texting her over the next several months and they develop a relationship. She tells him that she is no longer a virgin, which her parents did not know, and her parents would have reacted very poorly to had they known. And now he has a piece of information that he can use against her and drive a wedge. So now he can start saying, I know more about you than I care more about you than your parents do. I know more about you, to the point that she feels safe. And this escalates to the point where they start sharing pictures back and forth, and you can guess where that goes. So now he has pictures of her, and he's making her feel pretty. He's making her feel loved. He's making her feel connection in a gross way. But if you look at her relationship with parents, there was nothing there. So guess what? Kids go find it. And so she found it there. And eventually he invited her to a party. And that's where he sprung his trap, which is, hey, you're going to go sleep with my friend because he's having a bad day. And of course she was like, no, I'm not. And he came back with, well, cool. Then I'm going to tell your parents all the things you told me and show them the pictures, and your life's going to be ruined, and all your friends and everybody else. And so that is how she ended up in sexual slavery, being this guy's, him being her pimp, basically. And so I throw this out as an example of how secrecy and how secrets and how a bad relationship can be leveraged over time into something bigger. And it's not usually super fast. It can be, but that's usually flimsy, right? Relationships are built on time and trust, even with kids and even bad relationships. So you have time to catch this as a parent, but you got to be paying attention and you got to know what's going on. So perfect example you gave of, okay, I'm not going to fight you heads on. I'm going to have boundaries, but I'm going to try to respect what you want, but you're going to do it in a way that I'm comfortable with. And we're going to meet halfway, kind of thing. And we're going to do this in a good way. A mistake would be to just say, absolutely not in my house. Okay, that'll work until they're not in your house. And then guess what they're going to do?
Yeah.
Or they're going to run around and have secrets from you, because they're going to do it anyways. And then all they've learned is, wow, I really can't let dad find out or he's going to be mad. And so I think your approach is a wise one to say, okay, we can do that, but here's some guidelines. And I would encourage people to look at their own lives, look at their own kids, but also friends, family, things like that. And if you start to see that space and that not even secrets, but just hesitance to come clean and openness, that's a risk factor, right? It doesn't mean something's happening yet, but it means, boy, that's a fertile ground for that to happen. And unfortunately, that's just also being a teenager. So as they get into teenage years, that stuff's just going to happen naturally, and they are going to want more privacy and they are going to expect more stuff. So fine. But hopefully before that happens, you have built a relationship of having openness and truthfulness and support. Because by the time they're like 16, it's probably too late if you didn't do that already. It's going to be real tough.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Oh, Ross. I thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. Thank you for this discussion. When you and I emailed back and forth and you were searching for, I don't know, the content, the context of what we were going to talk about, and basically kind of talking about the expectations that we'd have about what things are going to be discussed. I told you, I know that these things are crucial. I know that we're not having these conversations. I know they're uncomfortable. People don't want to do this, and it's absolutely 100% necessary. So all of those things are true. And it's also true. And I mentioned it already. This conversation has put me well outside my comfort zone. And I have a thank you, whether I like it or not. I appreciate that you've made me reconsider some ideas that I had that I thought were grounded and reasoned and okay. And the fact of the matter is they weren't. So it's given me reason for pause and some reconsideration. And also some things that are going to be a starkly different direction. So I appreciate all that. Thank you very much. Do you feel like we've checked the boxes that we had ought to in a preliminary conversation on this kind of subject matter or not?
I definitely think we have. And it's funny how the time flies by. It's easy to fall into this and talk for hours and hours, but I think we have hit the main points that I think every parent should know. And I appreciate the opportunity to do it. I joke about it, but I would love to not have a job tomorrow because we solved the problem. I don't think that's likely, but that would make me the happiest unemployed guy in the world.
I would welcome seeing you on the unemployment line, and maybe if we're listening to what you're saying, and we're bringing these things to bear, we can inch a little bit closer to that likelihood. That's going to be my hope. That'll be my prayer. I tell you what, there are a lot of things to pray about when we're done here. So anyway, Ross Hick, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your sharing. And thank you for kicking the chair out from underneath me as I went to sit down. I do appreciate that. It's painful, but necessary. And I really appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Bye now.